Hello, this is Tim Congdon, Chair of the Institute of International Monetary Research. I'm going to talk this month about not just money and money trends, but about an asset which is usually regarded as an alternative to money, and certainly historically has been seen as a form of money, and that is gold. What I also want to do in this presentation is to link that up with current trends in American public debt and, in a sense, with American politics. Here we have a chart of the price of gold going back to 1970. It goes back a long way because in 1971, August 1971, President Nixon ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. For most of the previous, well, not all of it, but much of the previous history, going back millennia, gold had been seen as the perfect monetary commodity, and paper money, including the pound and then the dollar, were linked to gold. If central banks wanted to convert their dollar holdings into gold, they were free to do so until August 1971, when President Nixon said that America would refuse to honor this commitment that it had made in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. Now, you can see that since 1971, the price of gold has soared. In fact, it's gone up, in terms of dollars, from $35 an ounce to almost $3,500. The current price is kind of about $3,400 an ounce, which is 100 almost or so times higher over that 54-year period. The compound annual rate of return has been 8.9%, to give you the number, which completely outmatches the return on government bonds in any country in that 54-year period. Now, one obvious question here is what exactly is going on? And for most investors in gold, it gives them protection against inflation. You can see here, in fact, the increase in the price of gold has exceeded the rate of inflation in most economies, so you've had a positive real return, and it's given those who hold it a protection against inflation, including inflation in the United States. About half of gold, not quite half, is the stock of gold is used in jewelry, but the balance is in just hoards of gold privately held, and then a very large chunk, about a third, is held by central banks, and these central banks regard it as part of their nation's ultimate currency reserves. And their view of it is that it protects against inflation. Now, I want to just discuss the link between a nation's public finances, its debt, its deficit, and inflation. The story I'm about to tell is a pretty simple one in a way, but it's apparently too complicated for politicians in many countries, because there have been dozens of examples of the kind of process I'm now just going to describe. A nation has a budget deficit and an associated public debt. The interest on the public debt is, of course, part of government spending. Suppose that there's a rather feeble, inadequate political class, and they can't keep the budget deficit under control. Then the debt starts to rise. The growth of the debt adds to public spending because of this link to interest payments. The higher the debt interest. The larger the debt interest, part of public spending, the larger the budget deficit next year, unless taxes are raised. Then in the year after that, the debt is higher than before. So again, debt interest is higher than before, and that kicks up the budget deficit once more. It kicks up the public debt once more, kicks up the interest payment once more. There's a crazy kind of whirligig of public debt exploding out of control, in which the interest payments are a kind of Frankenstein monster with a life of their own. This occurs essentially because the government hasn't got the will, or hasn't got the public support, whatever the problem is, hasn't got the capacity to control the growth of debt, and so the debt interest runs out of control, so does the budget deficit, until we reach a point where the general public doesn't want to hold the government's debt, and neither, by the way, do foreign investors want to hold the public debt. So what does the government then do? Well, it can always go to the banking system, commercial banks, tell them, look, you must hold government debt. We regulate you, and you must hold government debt. So the commercial banking system holds more and more government debt and lends less to the private sector, certainly relative to GDP. But then the banking system finds that we've got too much debt. It can't offer decent deposit rates on its liabilities. So the ratio of banking intermediation, the ratio of banks' asset liabilities to national income falls. This happens in many Latin American countries in these processes. And the government then can't go to commercial banks, can't go to general public, can't go overseas. It goes to the central bank. And the central bank then becomes the dominant source of finance for the government, where this public debt is exploding indefinitely because of all the debt interest payments. By the way, in these kind of catastrophic situations, the non-interest public spending is often very low relative to GDP, compared, say, with modern Europe or the United States. It's very low because there's just no public confidence in what the government can do. Eventually, the growth of the debt is so fast, the monetization of the debt, the deficit, is proceeding at such a pace that inflation takes off, and inflation at 1%, 2%, 3% a year is manageable. Galloping inflation is often defined as inflation at 2% a month or more, but then the extreme is hyperinflation when there is a rise in prices of at least 50% a month. Now, I've described this as a crazy whirligig, this descent into the collapse in public finances, monetization, hyperinflation, is mad. How can this happen anywhere? Well, it's happened in dozens of countries. My friend Steve Hanke, United States, has chronicled dozens of these episodes. The link up with American public debt I now want to make is to say that maybe early days, it may not happen. I hope it never happens. It's unlikely of it to happen. But the USA has got problems of this sort at the moment. What we need to do now is to look at trends in American public debt in the last few years. You'll notice in this chart of the gold price that there's a sort of sprint upwards to the final leg in the last 2 or 3 years, and that has really been since COVID, and particularly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You may say, what's that got to do with it? I'll explain shortly. Okay, well, here is a chart of the ratio of debt interest to GDP in the USA going back almost to the American Revolution, American Wars of Independence at the end of the 18th century. And you can see that there have been periods when debt interest has been negligible relative to GDP in the USA, it's federal debt interest, but at the moment it's more or less at an all-time peak. That reflects the growth of public debt. The problem here is that under the Trump administration, so far, they have failed to bring this thing under control. Now, of course, to give President Trump and his colleagues their due, they know they have a problem here, and somehow they've got to deal with it. And so Elon Musk was appointed to bring government spending under control. He's since left the Trump administration. There's been some recriminations between Trump and Musk. And in particular, Musk has said that he's unhappy about a Republican-sponsored bill currently passing through Congress. Trump has described this as one big, beautiful bill. Musk has described it in rather less flattering terms. The purpose of this bill is to entrench tax cuts made in 2017, to entrench those in the American tax system, and indeed even to give some more tax cuts so that the net effect is a increase in the deficit, running at around about $600 billion a year, and then because of, as I keep on emphasizing, an increase in the deficit, faster increase in the debt, faster increase in debt interest. So what I've done here is to show you a chart of, these are my estimates, the higher line, the effect of the that somewhat bolder defined line shows you the impact of that one big beautiful bill on the ratio of public debt to GDP in future years out to about 2030. By that point, American public debt will be higher relative to GDP than in Italy. And may I just say it's been very clear in recent months that American public debt is losing favor even relative to Italian public debt. I said that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was part of the story. Well, foreign central banks, foreign investors hold American public debt partly because they're confident America will always repay. Perhaps not repay fully in inflation-adjusted terms, but certainly repay in nominal terms. Well, when Russia invaded Ukraine, effectively there was a block was placed on the holdings of American government debt by the Russian central bank. It was made so that the US Treasuries that the Russians held couldn't be used to finance their war effort. I thoroughly approve of that, by the way. Russia had broken international law. All the same, this was then telling nations around the world that in some circumstances, your holdings of US Treasuries can't be used. And you'll see in this final chart that the holdings, in terms of the ownership of the American public debt, at one point, a very large chunk of American public debt was held overseas. Still a very large chunk, but it's declining. And this decline started, in fact, before 2022. It started in 2013, 2014. It's tied up with geopolitics because this, of course, was when Xi Jinping became president of China, and the Chinese attitude towards America and the rest of the world became more hostile, and so the Chinese themselves stopped accumulating US Treasuries. Obviously, if the American public debt keeps on exploding, keeps on rising sharply, and foreign holders pull back, and the American public becomes reluctant to buy more US Treasuries, then the American government will have to finance itself from the banks. If it does so more and more from the Federal Reserve, the result will be higher monetary growth, that then will be inflation, and so on. And in this context, the attraction of gold is that it will, at the end of the inflation process, will almost certainly have kept its real value. And so what I've tried to explain in this presentation is the link between the American public finances, inflation, and the gold price, and so we understand why the gold price has been soaring and why, at the moment at least, there's no reason to expect that these processes have come to an end. Thank you.